In a quiet little neighborhood, where life usually moved at a slow and predictable pace, something strange happened overnight. In the middle of the local park, a place where kids played soccer, couples strolled hand in hand, and elderly folks fed pigeons, there stood an object that didn't belong. It was a white box, perfectly square, about 8 feet tall and wide. Its surface was smooth, almost glowing under the sunlight, with no visible seams, handles, or markings. It looked like someone had dropped a giant sugar cube in the middle of the grass. At first, people thought it might be some kind of art installation. After all, there had been rumors about a new exhibition coming to town. But when residents asked around, no one seemed to know anything about it. The city council denied placing it there, and even the local artists claimed they weren't responsible. Some joked that aliens must have left it behind, while others whispered about secret government experiments. Kids dared each other to touch it, but none of them got too close. It gave off an odd vibe, as if it didn't want to be disturbed. Marcus, a security guard who worked night shifts patrolling the area, noticed the box during his rounds. At first glance, he figured it was just another weird thing people did these days. He'd seen plenty of strange stuff in his line of work. Graffiti on buildings, random piles of trash dumped illegally, even lost pets wandering around late at night. But this was different. There was something unsettling about how silent it was, how still it stood, as though it were waiting for something or someone. The longer Marcus stared at it, the more questions popped into his head. Where did it come from? How did it get here without anyone noticing? And why did it feel so alive? Sure, it wasn't moving or making noise, but every time he passed by, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching him. Not in a creepy way, exactly, but in a way that made him hyper-aware of his surroundings. It was like standing near a wild animal. You knew it wouldn't hurt you, but you also knew it could if it wanted to. As the days went by, the box became the talk of the town. People gathered around it, snapping photos and sharing videos online. Some brought snacks and blankets, turning the park into an impromptu picnic spot. Others argued heatedly about what it might be, their theories ranging from practical to absurd. One man insisted it was a marketing stunt for a new tech gadget. Another swore it was a portal to another dimension. Meanwhile, Marcus kept his distance, observing everything quietly. Something told him not to trust it. Not yet, anyway. On his third night guarding the area, Marcus decided to take a closer look. Armed with nothing but his flashlight, he approached the box cautiously. Up close, it was even stranger than he'd imagined. The surface wasn't cold like metal or rough like stone. It felt warm, almost soft, as though it were breathing. When he tapped it lightly with his knuckles, the sound echoed faintly, like knocking on hollow wood. But what really caught his attention was the smell. It wasn't unpleasant, exactly, but it was unfamiliar. A mix of ozone and something sweet, like flowers blooming after rain. Just as Marcus was about to step back, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning quickly, he saw someone walking toward the box, a man in a long coat, moving with purpose. Before Marcus could say a word, the man reached out, pressed his hand against the surface, and disappeared. The night air was cool and still, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of crickets. Marcus stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. One moment, the man in the long coat had been standing there, his face shadowed but his movements deliberate. The next, he was gone, vanished into thin air after touching the white box. Marcus blinked rapidly, wondering if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Maybe it was fatigue or stress. Or maybe, just maybe, the impossible had actually happened. Hey, wait. Marcus called out instinctively, though deep down, he knew it was pointless. There was no reply, no sign of the man anywhere. He took a hesitant step forward, his boots crunching softly against the grass. His flashlight beam wavered as he pointed it at the box, illuminating its smooth surface. Nothing seemed different. It was still the same eerie, pristine white, unmarked and unyielding. Yet something about it felt change, more alive somehow, like it had awakened. Marcus circled the box slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He tapped it again with his knuckles, half expecting it to react this time, to hum, glow, or do something. But it remained silent and still, mocking him with its indifference. "What are you?" he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. The question hung in the air unanswered, adding to the growing unease that had settled over him like a heavy blanket. Back at his patrol car, Marcus tried to make sense of what he'd seen. Was the man some kind of magician? A scientist testing experimental technology? Or was this proof of something far stranger, something beyond human understanding? He radioed his supervisor, stumbling over his words as he described the incident. There was this guy, and then he touched the box, and he just disappeared, Marcus said, his voice tinged with disbelief. On the other end of the line, his supervisor sighed wearily. "You sure you're not seeing things, Marcus?" came the skeptical reply. "Maybe you need a break." "I'm telling you, I saw it happen," Marcus insisted, frustration creeping into his tone. But even as he spoke, doubt began to creep in too. Had he imagined it? Could exhaustion have conjured such a vivid hallucination? Shaking his head, he decided to go back and take another look. If nothing else, he needed to prove to himself that he wasn't losing his mind. When he returned to the park, the scene was eerily unchanged. The box stood exactly where it had been, untouched and unmoving. No footprints marred the ground around it, no signs of disturbance whatsoever. It was as if the man had never existed. Marcus crouched down, examining the base of the structure closely. Still nothing. No cracks, no hinges, no indication of how someone could possibly enter it. As he rose to his feet, a thought struck him. What if the man hadn't entered the box at all? What if he'd simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind no trace? The idea sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. Whatever was happening here, it defied logic. And yet, the evidence, or lack thereof, was right in front of him. The box was real. The man was real. And the disappearance, that was real too. Determined to stay vigilant, Marcus parked his car closer to the park and kept watch from a distance. Hours passed without incident, but sleep eluded him. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, made him jump. His thoughts raced uncontrollably. Who was the man? Why had he come here? And most importantly, where had he gone? By dawn, Marcus was exhausted but no closer to answers. As sunlight spilled over the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, he found himself staring at the box once more. Its presence loomed larger than ever, a silent sentinel guarding secrets he couldn't begin to comprehend. For now, all he could do was wait, and hope that whatever mysteries the box held would reveal themselves soon. By morning, the news of the mysterious white box had spread like wildfire. People from neighboring towns began arriving in droves, curiosity drawing them to the park like moths to a flame. Reporters set up cameras and microphones, eager to capture footage for their broadcasts. Scientists in lab coats arrived with clipboards and equipment, muttering about electromagnetic fields and quantum anomalies. Even conspiracy theorists showed up, holding signs that read, "The truth is inside," and handing out flyers about government cover-ups. The once quiet park was now a chaotic hub of activity, buzzing with theories and speculation. Marcus watched it all unfold with growing unease. He'd spent hours trying to explain what he'd seen, the man in the long coat vanishing into the box. But no one seemed to take him seriously. To most people, he was just another security guard with an overactive imagination. His supervisor had already warned him not to make any wild claims on camera, fearing it would reflect poorly on their department. So Marcus kept quiet, observing from the sidelines as experts poked and prodded at the box, searching for answers he doubted they'd find. The scientists were particularly persistent. They'd brought out every tool imaginable: thermal scanners, metal detectors, even a small drone equipped with cameras. But no matter what they tried, the box refused to yield its secrets. It didn't register as metal, wood, plastic, or anything else they tested for. Its surface absorbed light without reflecting it, making it impossible to get a clear reading. One scientist suggested it might be made of some unknown material, while another joked half-heartedly that it could be alien tech. Either way, frustration mounted as their efforts proved fruitless. Meanwhile, the crowd grew restless. Some people argued loudly, debating whether the box was a hoax or a genuine mystery. A few brave souls attempted to touch it themselves, mimicking the actions of the vanished man. But nothing happened. Their hands pressed against the surface harmlessly, leaving no mark or reaction. One teenager even climbed onto the box, shouting dramatically, "Open sesame," before jumping down in disappointment when nothing occurred. Marcus couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for them. They were all chasing answers, just like he was. But unlike him, they hadn't seen what he'd seen. As the day wore on, Marcus found himself drawn back to the box again and again. Each time he approached it, he felt that same strange pull, a mix of fascination and dread. He noticed details he hadn't before, tiny swirls in the surface that almost looked like fingerprints, though far too faint to belong to any human hand. Occasionally, he thought he saw shadows flicker across its edges, though when he blinked, they disappeared. Was his mind playing tricks on him? Or was the box trying to communicate in some way? That evening, reinforcements arrived. Additional security guards sent to manage the swelling crowd. Among them was Officer Daniels, a grizzled veteran who took one look at the box and snorted. "Looks like someone's art project got out of hand," he said dismissively. When Marcus recounted the events of the previous night, Daniels raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. Instead, he focused on keeping the crowd under control, barking orders at anyone who got too close. Despite the chaos around him, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The air felt charged, electric, as though the world itself was holding its breath. He glanced at the box one last time before heading to his patrol car to grab a fresh cup of coffee. As he sipped the bitter liquid, he reminded himself to stay alert. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't done revealing its secrets, not by a long shot. And deep down, Marcus knew he was the only one who truly understood the stakes. As the days turned into a week, the initial excitement surrounding the white box began to wane. The scientists packed up their equipment, frustrated by their inability to uncover anything concrete. Reporters moved on to fresher stories, and the crowd dwindled to just a handful of curious locals. But for Marcus, the mystery only deepened. He couldn't let it go, not after what he'd seen. Every night, as he patrolled the park, his thoughts returned to the man in the long coat and the strange, unexplainable disappearance. It gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. One particularly quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the park was bathed in twilight, Marcus found himself standing near the box again. He had been circling it absent-mindedly, lost in thought, when he heard something that made his blood run cold, faint whispers. At first, he thought it might be the wind rustling through the trees or distant voices from the neighborhood. But as he leaned closer, the sound became clearer. It wasn't coming from outside the box. It was coming from within. The whispers were soft, almost melodic, overlapping in a way that defied comprehension. They seemed to speak in languages Marcus didn't recognize. Some sounded guttural and harsh, others fluid and musical. Occasionally, he caught snippets that almost resembled words, but they slipped away before he could grasp their meaning. His heart raced as he pressed his ear against the surface of the box, trying to make sense of the murmurs. It felt warm under his touch, pulsing faintly, as though alive. For a moment, he wondered if he was losing his mind. How could a solid object emit sounds? And why did it feel so responsive? When backup arrived later that night, Marcus hesitated to mention what he'd heard. He knew how it would sound, like the ramblings of someone sleep-deprived or overworked. Instead, he kept his discovery to himself, pacing around the box with growing unease. The whispers continued sporadically, sometimes fading into silence, other times swelling into a chorus that sent chills down his spine. Each time he tried to focus on them, they grew maddeningly elusive, as if deliberately avoiding understanding. Desperate for answers, Marcus decided to dig deeper. During his breaks, he scoured the internet for information about similar phenomena. At first, he found nothing but dead ends, hoaxes, urban legends, and conspiracy theories. But then, late one night, he stumbled upon a forum dedicated to unexplained events. Users shared stories of mysterious objects appearing in random locations, often accompanied by strange noises or disappearances. One post caught his attention. A user described encountering a black obelisk that emitted eerie sounds before vanishing without a trace. Another mentioned symbols drawn on such objects to activate them. Could the white box be part of some larger pattern? Intrigued, Marcus printed out screenshots of the posts and tucked them into his notebook. He also jotted down sketches of the symbols mentioned in the forum, a mix of geometric shapes and intricate patterns. Though skeptical, he couldn't ignore the possibility that these markings might hold a clue. What if the box wasn't just a random anomaly? What if it required specific actions to unlock its secrets? That night, as he stood guard near the box, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent, as if urging him to act. He glanced at the notes in his hand, then back at the box. Its smooth surface gleamed under the moonlight, taunting him with its silence. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to reveal itself easily, but Marcus was determined to try. After all, he was the only one who seemed willing, or able, to take the next step. And deep down, he knew the truth was waiting, hidden just beyond reach. The next night, Marcus arrived at the park with a sense of urgency he hadn't felt before. The whispers from the box had grown louder, more insistent, and they seemed to follow him even when he wasn't near it. It was as if the box knew he was onto something, and it wanted him to act. Armed with chalk, a flashlight, and his notebook filled with sketches of symbols, Marcus approached the structure cautiously. His hands trembled slightly as he knelt beside it, the cool night air doing little to calm his racing thoughts. He began by drawing one of the simplest symbols, a circle surrounded by triangular shapes near the base of the box. At first, nothing happened. The surface remained smooth and unyielding, its eerie whiteness reflecting the dim glow of his flashlight. But as Marcus added another symbol, this one resembling an intricate spiral, he noticed a faint vibration beneath his fingertips. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. The box was reacting. Encouraged, Marcus continued sketching the patterns he'd found online, connecting them in ways that felt instinctively right. Each new mark seemed to awaken something within the box, causing the vibrations to grow stronger. By the time he completed the final symbol, a jagged zigzag line intersecting a series of dots, the entire structure hummed with energy. The sound was low and resonant, like the thrum of a tuning fork amplified 1,000 times. Marcus stepped back, his breath catching in his throat as the ground beneath him quivered ever so slightly. Suddenly, the whispers returned, but this time, they weren't muffled or distant. They were clear, sharp, and overwhelming, filling the air around him like a chorus of unseen voices. Some spoke in tones that sounded pleading, others commanding, and still others incomprehensible. Marcus clutched his ears, trying to block out the noise, but it didn't help. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, swirling around him until he could barely think straight. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the cacophony stopped. The humming ceased, and the vibrations faded into silence. For a moment, everything was still. Marcus exhaled shakily, lowering his hands and staring at the box. Had he done something wrong? Was this some kind of warning? Before he could process what had happened, movement caught his eye. A figure emerged from the shadows, walking steadily toward the box. It was a woman this time, her long coat billowing behind her as she moved with quiet determination. Her face was partially obscured by the brim of her hat, but there was no mistaking her purpose. She ignored Marcus completely, her focus fixed solely on the white box. "Wait," Marcus called out, stepping forward. "What are you doing?" But the woman didn't respond. Without hesitation, she reached out and placed her hand against the surface of the box, just like the man in the long coat had done days earlier. And just like before, she vanished instantly, leaving behind no trace of her presence. Marcus stood frozen, his mind reeling. This couldn't be coincidence. There was clearly a pattern here, a method to the madness. Whoever these people were, they knew exactly how to interact with the box. And now, thanks to the symbols he'd drawn, it seemed the box was ready for him. Summoning every ounce of courage, Marcus approached the glowing surface. His heart pounded as he extended his hand, his fingers trembling mere inches away. He hesitated, fear gripping him like a vice. What lay beyond? Would he disappear too? Or worse, would he regret not finding out? With a deep breath, Marcus pressed his palm against the box. For a split second, warmth spread through his hand, followed by an intense pull, as though the box itself was drawing him inward. Then everything went dark. The sensation was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. One moment, he was standing in the quiet park, his hand pressed against the glowing surface of the white box. The next, he felt as though he were being pulled through a tunnel of light and sound, his body weightless yet stretched in every direction. His vision blurred, colors swirling around him like liquid rainbows, while the whispers from the box grew into a deafening roar. It was disorienting, terrifying, and strangely exhilarating all at once. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the chaos stopped. Marcus stumbled forward, blinking rapidly as his eyes adjusted to his new surroundings. At first, he thought he might have passed out or imagined the entire thing, until he looked around. What he saw defied every law of nature and reason. He wasn't in the park anymore. In fact, he wasn't even on Earth, or at least, not the Earth he knew. The landscape before him was surreal, almost dreamlike. Floating islands hovered in the sky, their surfaces covered in lush greenery and shimmering waterfalls that cascaded into nothingness. Rivers of golden light snaked across the ground, illuminating crystalline structures that towered high above, refracting beams of color in every direction. The air smelled sweet, like blooming flowers mixed with something metallic, and the temperature was perfectly balanced. Not too hot, not too cold. It was beautiful, awe-inspiring, and utterly alien. But what caught Marcus's attention most were the people. Standing nearby were the man in the long coat and the woman who had vanished earlier. They turned to face him, their expressions unreadable. Neither spoke, but their eyes seemed to hold centuries of knowledge, and perhaps a hint of pity. Behind them stood others, dressed in similar attire, watching silently as if waiting for something. Where am I?" Marcus finally managed to ask, his voice trembling. No one answered. Instead, the man gestured toward the horizon, where a massive structure loomed in the distance. It looked like an enormous version of the white box, its surface pulsing faintly with the same warm glow Marcus had felt when he touched it. Something about it felt familiar, yet profoundly otherworldly. As Marcus took a hesitant step forward, he noticed subtle details about this place that made his stomach churn. Time didn't seem to flow normally here. Shadows shifted unpredictably, and the light changed hues without warning. Objects appeared and disappeared, flickering like static on an old TV screen. It was as though reality itself was unstable, constantly reshaping and rewriting itself. Despite the strangeness, Marcus couldn't help but feel drawn to explore further. Every instinct screamed at him to run back to the safety of his world. But curiosity overruled fear. If this place held answers about the box and why it had appeared in his world, he needed to find out. Maybe these strangers could explain what was happening, Or maybe they expected him to figure it out. The group began walking toward the towering structure, and Marcus followed cautiously, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. He half expected the scene to dissolve into darkness, leaving him stranded in some endless void. But the world remained steady, albeit surreal, pulling him deeper into its mysteries. When they reached the base of the massive structure, the woman finally spoke. Her voice was calm but carried an authority that demanded attention. "You've crossed a threshold," she said simply, her words echoing faintly. "This is no ordinary place, and you are no ordinary visitor." Marcus swallowed hard, his mind racing. "What does that mean? Why did you bring me here?" The man stepped forward, his gaze piercing. "We didn't bring you. You chose to come, just as others have chosen before you." Before Marcus could respond, the ground beneath them vibrated gently, and the massive structure emitted a soft hum. Whatever awaited inside, Marcus realized, would change everything he thought he knew about the universe and his role within it. The massive structure loomed above them, its surface shimmering like liquid glass. As Marcus stood there, the hum grew louder, resonating through his chest and making his teeth vibrate faintly. The strangers exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable but somehow expectant. It was clear they were waiting for him to take the next step, though Marcus had no idea what that step entailed or what it might cost him. "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking under the weight of uncertainty. He felt small and insignificant in this alien world, surrounded by towering crystalline spires and floating islands that defied gravity. Every instinct told him to turn back, to run as far away from this place as possible. But something deeper, a mix of curiosity, duty, and stubbornness, kept him rooted to the spot. The woman stepped closer, her movements deliberate and calm. "We don't want anything from you," she said softly, her tone almost soothing. "This isn't about us. It's about your world and whether it deserves a second chance." Marcus frowned, confusion clouding his thoughts. "My world? What are you talking about? What does Earth have to do with all this?" He gestured vaguely at the surreal landscape around them, still struggling to comprehend how such a place could even exist. The man in the long coat spoke next, his voice low and measured. "Your planet is dying," he said bluntly. "Pollution, greed, neglect. It's poisoning everything. If nothing changes, if humanity continues down this path, your world will collapse. This," he motioned toward the glowing structure behind them, "is both a warning and an opportunity." "A warning," Marcus echoed, his heart sinking. "And an opportunity for what?" "For redemption," the woman interjected. "For learning, for growth. The box brought you here because you've seen glimpses of the truth. You've felt its pull, heard its whispers. That makes you different. Special." Marcus shook his head, overwhelmed. "I'm just a security guard. I'm nobody important. Why would it choose me?" "It doesn't choose based on importance," the man replied, his piercing gaze locking onto Marcus. "It chooses those who are willing to listen, those who can see beyond themselves and act for the greater good." Before Marcus could respond, the ground beneath them shifted slightly, drawing his attention back to the massive structure. A section of its surface began to ripple, like water disturbed by a breeze. Slowly, an opening appeared, revealing a dimly lit chamber within. The air inside seemed to pulse with energy, casting soft waves of light across the faces of the strangers. "This is where the answers lie," the woman said, stepping toward the entrance. "But beware, knowledge comes with responsibility. Once you understand what's at stake, there's no going back." Marcus hesitated, torn between fear and determination. On one hand, he wanted nothing more than to return to his ordinary life, to forget this bizarre experience ever happened. But on the other hand, he couldn't ignore the urgency in the strangers' voices, or the gnawing feeling that he'd been given a rare chance to make a difference. Taking a deep breath, Marcus followed them into the chamber. Inside, the walls were covered in intricate patterns that glowed faintly, resembling constellations scattered across the night sky. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested a small orb. Its surface shimmered with colors that shifted and danced, as though alive. The woman approached the pedestal and placed her hand gently on the orb. Instantly, images began to project around them. Scenes of environmental destruction, cities choked with smog, oceans filled with plastic waste, forests reduced to barren wastelands. Then came visions of hope. Communities coming together to clean rivers, scientists developing sustainable technologies, children planting trees. Each image was accompanied by a surge of emotion so powerful it brought tears to Marcus's eyes. "These are the two paths before you," the man said solemnly. "Destruction or renewal, darkness or light. The choice belongs to humanity, but you must carry the message." As the final image faded, Marcus realized the weight of what they were asking. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was a messenger, tasked with sharing what he'd seen. And though the road ahead would be difficult, he knew he couldn't turn away, not when the fate of his world hung in the balance. As the images faded and the chamber fell silent, Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing with everything he'd just witnessed. The strangers watched him intently, their expressions unreadable but patient. They didn't pressure him or rush him. They simply waited, as if they knew this decision wasn't one to be made lightly. And they were right. This wasn't just about choosing a path for himself. It was about deciding whether he had the courage to carry an impossible truth back to a world that might not believe him. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. He thought about his life before all of this. The late-night patrols, the mundane routines, the quiet solitude of his existence. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe, predictable. Now, standing in this alien chamber surrounded by glowing symbols and otherworldly strangers, he felt like a completely different person. Or maybe the same person pushed far beyond what he ever thought he could handle. "What happens if I say no?" Marcus asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I can't do this?" The woman tilted her head slightly, her gaze softening. "If you refuse, the box will seal itself forever," she said. "No more warnings, no more chances. Humanity will continue on its current path until it's too late." "And if I say yes?" Marcus countered, his heart pounding. "Then you become the bridge," the man replied. "You bring the message back, not just with words, but with action. You'll have seen what's possible, both the destruction and the hope. It's up to you to inspire others to choose wisely." Marcus let out a shaky breath, staring at the orb on the pedestal. Its shifting colors seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, as though it understood his struggle. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine staying here, in this strange, beautiful place where time flowed differently and reality bent to unseen rules. He could leave behind the noise and chaos of his world, live among these enigmatic strangers who clearly knew so much more than he did. But deep down, he knew that wasn't who he was. Running away wasn't in his nature. "I'll do it," Marcus said finally, his voice steadier now. "I don't know how, and I don't know if anyone will listen, but I'll try." The woman nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "That's all we ask," she said. "Courage is the first step toward change." With that, the chamber began to shift around them. The glowing patterns on the walls dimmed, and the hum of energy softened into silence. The strangers stepped back, giving Marcus space as the entrance to the chamber reopened. Beyond it, the surreal landscape awaited, one last glimpse of this extraordinary world before he returned to his own. As Marcus walked through the opening, the air around him shimmered, and once again, he felt the familiar pull of the box drawing him inward. This time, however, there was no fear, only resolve. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the park, standing in front of the white box. It was still glowing faintly, but something about it felt quieter now, as though its purpose had been fulfilled. Without hesitation, Marcus turned and began walking toward the city lights in the distance. He didn't have a plan yet, but he knew where to start. Telling his story, sharing what he'd seen, and hoping someone would listen. Behind him, the box flickered once, then vanished entirely, leaving only an empty patch of grass and the faint echo of whispers carried on the wind.